Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday evening with us. I am Yimin, and I am a designer of Till Biofashion Tech, an ecological fashion studio of the community-based development studio Till, which stands for Today's Industrial Living Landscapes. As the organizer of this event, we are so very excited to inaugurate the Union of Concerned Researchers in Fashion Connecticut chapter. UCRF is an international alliance of fashion researchers that are involved in addressing our intensifying ecological and planetary crisis. The artist-founder of Till Biofashion Tech, Jane Philbrick, is a signatory of UCRF. I learned about UCRF through Dr. Tim Rissanen, who is the co-founder of the organization and a professor I extremely admire at my alma mater, Parsons School of Design. UCRF's mission to take a leadership role in fashion sustainability, to advocate for systematic change, to diversify the discourse of the field, to organize, and to formulate visions, converged with my path, a young designer researching, experimenting, and creating solutions. It also converges with the purpose of Till Biofashion Tech, that is to build a new model that makes the old model obsolete, quoting Buckminster Fuller. It is truly exciting that we have a diverse panel here this evening to explore the opportunity of ecological fashion, not in the distant future, but right here, right now. We came to know these practitioners through community connections, through doing what we truly believe in and doing what must happen. There is so much beauty in being connected to these amazing people and realizing the support and companionship we have. And then I want to just take 1 minute, a quick second to say thank you to Priscilla Igram and the Studio Fairfield for providing us with the venue tonight. And once again, thank you so much for being here. The movement of ecological fashion and planetary ecology is a movement of imagination, not of outlandish thoughts, but of courageous action that we urgently need today. Enjoy. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Eamon, and thank you very much, Ab and Priscilla, for hosting us. There you are. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'll sneak through.
So the Union of Concerned Researchers in Fashion connects our small community globally and looks at the importance of engaging in the issues in a sustained and complex way. We know that fashion is one of the most polluting industries in the world, and there's a real market imperative to find a solution. But it's hard to have an output that can satisfy our crisis if the actual model itself is responsible. And so when Eamon says this is an imagination effort, we really are here to ask questions with our practitioners who come from fashion, from fiber, from farming, ranch, and from business enterprise. And it's, for us, a model of building a diverse partnership so that all of us can come together from our different expertise to create something we don't even know what it can be yet. And my name is Jane Philbrick, as Eamon introduced me, and I'm an artist. And I'm not a fashion designer, and I'm not a farmer, and I am an entrepreneur. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I can sit with you, Nancy. And there's for those of you who know art history, there is a terrific legacy of artists working at the system level for really wholesale reinvention. Commonly, it can be thought of as an artist as someone who paints or sculpts. And one of the things I think about and have been thinking about for a couple of decades now is how do we as artists invent and create without further drawing away from scarce and cherished natural resources that are under pressure, and then produce in such a way that we are not adding to more of the output that is a major issue in the industry we're dealing with now, a fashion of overproduction. And so to me, it is about bringing these people together, bringing all of us together, and thinking, how do we reinvent what we do, and do so together, and do so with terrific satisfaction and engagement. So Our panelists here, I'm going to start at the far end with William, who is our Chief Creative Officer at TIL-BFT, and sits here speaking from a fashion perspective. And then we have Jennifer Duff, who is with Fibershed. She's going to explain what that is, a national organization around building soil vitality to support biodiversity through plant-based fibers and animal systems. Yes? Connecticut Fibershed chapter of the national organization Fibershed. And then our really very special guest is Trent Luce, who is a sixth-generation central Nebraskan rancher and a radio host. And I had the great, terrific pleasure of being a guest on your radio show, Rural Root Radio. And welcome to the Northeast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, a pleasure. And then here we have Nancy. And Nancy is the executive director of the Southeastern Connecticut Enterprise Region, so speaking really from an economic development and entrepreneurship basis. I would like to begin with questions, okay? And I have questions for each of you, and then I think that will, so you know what the format is. And so we'll ask the questions, which will lead toward, I think, a bit of a shared discussion, and then very quickly, I hope that we are able to invite from all of you who've come. So I would begin with Jennifer. Yeah, I know, your favorite part, public speaking. Great.
All right.
And so Jennifer, I would really love for you to introduce Fibershed, which is how we met.
So Fibershed is basically a group that, in a similar way to how the local food movement has come up, is encouraging localized fiber. So in the same way that you would have your organic lettuce that's grown locally, your Fibershed product, something that was grown in the Connecticut Fibershed, would be raised in Connecticut, and then all of the economic sort of inputs, the milling and the shearing and the hand knitting or weaving, would all also happen in Connecticut. So you're keeping that local economy really vibrant. And the national organization is also focusing a lot on teaching farmers regenerative grazing practices. We haven't branched into that too much yet in Connecticut, but it's on the horizon, I'm sure. But we're building our local economy, and we're promoting our local farmers and encouraging the use of local fibers.
I think one of the things that's amazing about the organization, though, is it really is a national organization, and you have quite a close relationship with Southeastern New England Fibershed and New York Fibershed, and right, I mean, so it's really, while it's very local, it's also really a regional organization, and so which I think aligns very closely with the way ecologists, progressive ecologists, are looking at entire territories. And even urban planners aren't looking so much at this, as much as we talk about the actuality of the divide between urban and rural. We have to look forward, and it's to your mission of understanding that these are geographies that are connected and interdependent, and how do we see ourselves together?
Well, and the Fibershed model is much more resilient. So with our sort of broken fiber supply chain currently in the U.S., we have very, very limited amount of milling and scouring, the various manufacturing for wool. And one of the things that's happening with all of these sort of nodes of fiber sheds in their overlapping regions is that it's to sort of bolster that industry and to create, vibrant centers in a lot of different places of the country. So it creates a much more resilient system if you can build manufacturing in different pockets of the United States instead of just everyone sending it to one place.
Thank you. One of the urgencies for this is for those of you who are maybe new to the fashion world, though you can't be because we all get dressed in the morning, but maybe not as aware. Only 3% of all the clothes worn in this country are actually made domestically. And post-NAFTA, I said at one point that we lost our manufacturing, and I believe, William, you said we scrapped it. We gave it away, which is a different thing. So when we're looking at the fiber that we're pretty much focused on tonight on wool, 90% of global wool supply is global fine apparel wool comes from Australia, which has been, as all of us know, tragically from drought to wildfires. So there's what we call supply chain precarity. And then now what we're looking at is with the virus. All our outsourcing offshore clothing, that manufacturing chain is really looking very vulnerable and is very vulnerable. William does a lot of work in Europe as well, so if you could speak about the context of this from a fashion perspective.
Hello.
Both from the fiber and from the manufacturing, please.
So I've worked in the U.S., in Japan, in Hong Kong, in France, and in Italy, and I'm involved in another project in Italy. And for the last month and a half, we've been scrambling to help some of our clients bring their business back to Europe because China is essentially closed. And, they've gotten very addicted to having the price structure and how easy it is to buy finished product in China and ship it around the world. So all these famous brands are bringing their production back to Italy. And then now that Italy's shut, all those companies are shut. They sent everyone home. So, and we all think, oh, it'll pass, but there are very strict seasons involved in fashion. So if that product isn't finished by May so that it can be on a boat from China June 1, so that it can be in stores or in warehouses July 1 and in stores July 15th, it won't happen. So I'm concerned for all of us that, our creature comforts will go to the store in July, August, September. There'll be nothing there. So none of us are really thinking about that. But so, and one of the strengths of Italy is that they have this deep knowledge of manufacturing. So when you walk in and say, I want to build this, they say, sure, no problem. They understand you. It's all through sign language, whether you speak the language or not. We had that here. We gave it all away. We wanted it cheaper. We wanted it easier. People just wanted to make the same thing over and over and over again. Oh no, we don't make shirts. We make t-shirts. I can make a hoodie. I can make a t-shirt. That's it. I don't want to try anything else. That's how I'm profitable. And away it went. Now the struggle will be to replace some of that know-how, but I think through technology we can do that. And so the idea that we can, and the other interesting thing about fashion is it creates tribes. Like, are you Ralph Lauren? Are you Calvin Klein? Are you Prada? Are you Armani? But to create a tribe where people are not so much worried about fashion, but they're worried about where it came from and is it helping locally. That's quite interesting. That's sort of the new way forward, we believe.
So, sorry. To that notion of the local, and Jennifer, as you said, because I know you're involved with the local food movement as well, that question of where did my food come from, we're now asking where does my fiber come from? And this is really a very gnarly issue. With Jennifer, the Fiber Shed founder is a woman named Rebecca Burgess, and Rebecca Burgess' book about Fiber Shed came out in November, and the first 2 chapters are pretty hard going because it's really looking at the chemical composition of our clothing. And we've all, we don't even think about this, but the membrane of our skin is very porous. And these textiles are rubbing against our skin. And as one of the things we're looking at is a growing movement of buying vintage, buying used clothing. And with some of these new synthetics, when they volatilize, when they break down, we're not quite sure what's happening over there. And so, William, I wanted to ask you very specifically speaking, so William's background, he did his undergraduate degree at Philadelphia University, as it was then known, Jefferson now,
Right.
Which is the country's oldest textile school.
Right.
Went off and did your master's work in Florence.
Right. Then
Then worked in Paris for legendary studios of Balmain and Balenciaga, came back to New York, Perry Ellis, J. Mendel, Dan von Furstenberg. And so from that position of being in a real fashion industry, what do you think of the sustainability movement within the actual world of fashion? We know that the UN Charter came out, And in November, Condé Nast signed it, which requires, as an article of a signatory, that you have to use your platform to speak to the consumer about climate impacts and environmental impacts.
Yeah, I think if, especially in today's world, if you want disruption, you want change, or if you want change, it must be disruptive. So, Ford has been making electric cars for years. They went nowhere. Tesla came along. They've changed the world. Like or not like Elon Musk, he's changed the world. And I think the same thing needs to happen in fashion, because all of these big brands that are deeply seated with deep and long production tunnels are going to say, oh, now this is green. And what they really mean is this product has 10% organic something stuck inside of it. They don't mean it's sustainable. They're going to tell you that, and you're going to look at the promotion and go, okay, this is better. Just like when they changed baked beans and they said new and improved, all they did was change the label. It's the same system. So I think as far as local economies and as far as sustainable fashion, the only way to change that system is to upend it, to disrupt it. And that's, I think that's our goal.
Yeah, welcome to
I
the
believe.
revolution. Thank you. Trent.
Jane, I can be a disruptor.
That's why you're at the table.
And we have a sign language in rural America too, but I'm not sure we want to go into that. Yeah.
So my question to you, and you were just in the UK and meeting with the farmers in the UK, and I know that you are a rancher and we have farmers here. We're small scale. My question to you is really about when we're looking at the importance of the wool economy in making good ecological choices. A very important part of that economy is meat and the animal protein. And one of the conversations that you'll have from people is like, oh, well, don't eat meat, and livestock is methane and bad for the environment, all of that. And I thought that the farmer you interviewed on in the UK spoke to this really well. And I know that my colleagues who care about the wool economy are really actively looking to say, how do we support the meat part of this sheep economy? And I'm wondering if you could speak to that for us.
I would love to speak to that. I was in the UK for 5 days this week. I got on 9 farms, excuse me, and then I met with the ambassador for the U.S. to the UK, and it was a tremendous event. And there are many thoughts that have run through my mind as we're talking about this and leading up to it. And first I'll talk about greenhouse gases, because obviously it is the top of mind for so many people today. And the lead researcher on this in the world, in fact, when I'm in the UK this week, they're quoting Dr. Frank Mitlerner from the University of California, Davis. And he's been working on this in terms of greenhouse gases from all sources. When I first met him 18 years ago, people were laughing at him, looking at what type of greenhouse gases a cow emits. And they're like, what a ridiculous research project. Suddenly today, we're fortunate that we have this data. And much of the reason that we're all here is just to make sure people understand fact from fiction. The greatest fiction in food consumption today is the ruminant animals' contribution to climate change. If you look at just the United States alone.
Could you explain ruminant?
Ruminant would be all animals that have more than a simple stomach. Those of us in this room have a simple stomach. A chicken has a simple stomach. A pig has a simple stomach. Cows and sheep have 4 chambers to their stomach. Sheep's stomach's not exactly like a cow, but it operates in the same manner. So a horse, a goat, a llama, alpaca, what haven't I named, a cow, they all have 4 chambers to their stomach. And what that means is they can consume cellulose material. They have a fermentation vat in there where they extract the nutrients from it, and then they re-fertilize the soil, and that's really what the soil health is about. You cannot have proper soil health without the ruminant animal. Right. It's just impossible. And so if you look at the greenhouse gas production in the United States today, 2% comes from ruminant animals. That would be cattle, bison, the few number of horses that we have, the 6 million head of sheep that we have, fewer goats than that we have. All landfills in the United States contribute 2.3% of the greenhouse gases. Transportation, people driving on I-95 through Manhattan into Fairfield, Connecticut with one person in a car contributes 25% of all greenhouse gases in the United States. 30% come from the fact that we don't want to be in here with a candle. It comes from that electricity generation. And the remaining 40% is from other sources. Number one in that is construction. How many times have we heard today that this used to be green, it used to be farmland, now it's concrete, condos, and consumers? The interesting part of that whole scenario is that the only sector within that whole diagram that I just described that contributes to reducing the emissions from the atmosphere and putting carbon back into the soil is the ruminant animal.
Could you explain how?
When you drive a car, your primary emission is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide goes into the atmosphere. The only thing that uses carbon dioxide, a plant. Carbon dioxide is plant food. And the more that you have, more carbon dioxide you have in the atmosphere, the more plant food you have. And if an animal does not consume that plant, it will not be as healthy and it will not consume as many of the greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. The only greenhouse gas that we talk about, and the reason they want to hang up on methane, is because cows do produce methane, but methane has a life cycle of 10 years, where carbon dioxide has a life cycle of an infinite amount of years. So you use the ruminant animals, you graze the forages. The more animals that you have, the more forage requirements you have, the more carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases you pull from the atmosphere, and the more that you produce. So the unfair story in the whole scenario is the consumption of meat in that, and the way that we do that in the United States.
So the important thing about grazing, though, as I've understood it from soil scientists, is, I mean, there was a whole concern that grazing was actually the problem, and grazing was ruining the soil, when actually now it's understood that when you graze and you tear the grass and it tears the roots, it promotes actually the roots growing even stronger to repair themselves. So that's part of the revitalization that happens for the soil.
That's correct. And it's about proper grazing.
Proper grazing.
And that's our
right.
one thing that gets me excited about wool, and I'm a cattleman. I absolutely love my cattle. In 1934, we had 70 million head of sheep in the United States. Today we have 6 million. 1934, we had 70 million sheep. 1934, the Taylor Grazing Act was passed, and it put preferential treatment to grazing cattle over sheep. Consequently, we went away from one of the greatest grazing management strategies, which, by the way, was incubated in Texas, and that was the more multi-species grazing that you do, the healthier the forages.
Always, right.
So the cows are the most finicky. They are just like my kids, they only eat certain things. Only the primo things, right? And then the horses come along, and the horses eat things that the cattle didn't eat. And then the least finicky of all is the sheep and then the goats. And when you do that multi-species grazing, you benefit the forages, you benefit the production of all of the products you get from those animals. And here's the sad part that I don't know if anybody here is aware of. Obviously, Abby is. The majority of the sheep in this country today, it costs more to shear the sheep than the wool is worth. Consequently, the biggest trend in sheep production is to hairless sheep, Dorpers and Katahdins, those that do not need to be shorn. That to me is a travesty, because this natural fiber has a tremendous opportunity. Now, I'm not going to speak ill of my friends in Australia, because I have been fortunate to address them 2 times in the last 5 years in their big sheep meeting. They have a similar scenario. In 1950, when wool was king, Australia had 150 million sheep. Today, they're less than 70 million head of sheep. So the real issue comes back to what we've been talking about, and I think Jen lined it out really well. How can we source natural fibers? How can we continue to utilize these natural fibers in a local way when the local benefits the local economy? But just to make sure that we make all of these decisions based upon the facts. One reason I was really excited about coming is that there's this overlooming notion that farmers are somehow not sustainable today. my family has been farming the same land, Quincy, Illinois, since 1832. I thought that was pretty cool. This week, I was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I was on a farm that was homesteaded in 1736. And that family is still farming the same land. In 1900, it required 5 acres of land to produce enough food to feed one person for a year. It also required 5 acres of land to produce enough food to feed the horses and the mules that we used to produce the food in 1900, because we had 0 tractors in 1900. So you could literally say that in 1900, it required 10 acres of land to produce enough food to feed one person for a year. And in 2020, it takes less than 1/3 of an acre to produce enough food to feed one person for a year, because farmers have been sustainable. The greatest travesty in what we're doing today in agriculture is that we've moved away from the word sustainable because people have hijacked it. We're afraid to endorse anybody talking about us being sustainable, because what the new term of sustainability is somebody sitting in a cubicle designing a marketing campaign for some food marketer is talking about what we can do to help the farmer become sustainable. Who's more sustainable than been in the same business, the same land since 1736? And so getting all of these facts presented about the sustainability and what we've learned in soil health, that is the new dawn. We've learned a lot about soil health, but we're not there yet. We're going to continue to increase organic matter. We're going to continue to focus on improving soil health, and that's where we're going to focus for the future. You know, I'll just give you a quick history lesson that kind of describes that. I think most people learn that from 1930 to 1937, the Great Plains of America had what we call the Dust Bowl. It was severe drought, high temperatures. Many of the California families left the Great Plains of America in the 30s because they couldn't hack it. There was dust tracked as far as Manhattan, New York, from Guyman, Oklahoma. That's how severe it was. The best part of the story is that from 2000 to 2007, the Great Plains of America had less measurable precipitation than we did during the Dirty 30s. And we did not relive the Dust Bowl. In fact, from 2000 to 2007, we continued to produce more food each and every year with less rainfall than we had during the Dirty 30s. Why? Because we've been working on soil health. We've been working on organic matter in the soil. We've been working on maintaining wind erosion. And we do all of these things better than we've ever done, knowing that we're just getting started on this journey.
Thank you so much. So one of the urgencies for this from a global supply chain vulnerability perspective is the way temperatures are rising. So in Australia, with the if you go to the link online, you'll see that we've put research up for you to look at, and we've done a small animation of research on the droughts in Australia, and it's 400 years of drought cycles that were then always corrected by rain. And what happened in 2016 was actually quite a wet year, but the temperatures are so high that the rain is evaporating, and so the drought conditions persist. And so the health of our landscapes and rebuilding that soil becomes even more important as our other supplies are at peril. And one of the things that I think is our opportunity, and Nancy, where we're meeting, is both the combination of supply and manufacturing. So to your statistics about how much cattle we've lost in these years, there's a book that came out, Vanishing Fleece, Clara Parks. Last year. It's been very new. I mean, there's been some really good work on wool recently. And she cites a statistic, which is between 2000 and 2011, 17 U.S. manufacturers closed every day. That is an amazing statistic, okay? So when we're looking at these supply chain precarities, the difficulty of the quarantine in Asia, the wool supply at risk in Australia, Nancy, I would say, as an economic development head and looking for to build opportunity, this is kind of a fantastic time for us to be working like this. But I really have to complicate that by saying one of the issues we deal with in the fashion world is a business model that relies on toxic overproduction. Okay? So I think to your point, Trent, when you were saying, let's get these facts straight, one of the things that's happened with wool becoming such a premium fiber is this idea that it's a solution, okay? But when we look at something like where does, to the issue of trade, which I think it's complicated, as your guest in your last, your most recent interview talked about trade and the importance of trade and having cooperation internationally and how good that is for global well-being, right? But trade also has these incredible ecological impacts, and shipping is a really, really dirty transport. So, Nancy, we're in a really interesting situation of looking at our supply chains are fragile. It's a tremendous opportunity for us to move forward. But to move forward and just reiterate what we had in the past isn't going to get us where we're going to get, where we need to get. And so I'm wondering if you want to have some thoughts about what that might mean, looking at building development and opportunity in our local communities.
Okay, I'll use this one. Yes, I'll pull you guys over. So I'm kind of like the wet blanket in the room, right? So economic development is boring. We love apartments. We love construction.
If there's a fire, we're in good shape.
Yeah, exactly. So I met Jane, about 6 weeks ago or so. Came in to talk about the really cool project she's doing at Stanford. Really cool, really exciting, very interesting. And then she started talking about how she wanted to put a wool scour in New London. And I looked at her like she was wackadoo. I was like, well, cleaning wool in a city? What are you talking about? And as we were talking, it occurred to me as I had to step back and put these cool and interesting notions into language that we understand. Manufacturing. Southeastern Connecticut has a manufacturing heritage that goes back hundreds of years. We have a burgeoning defense industry. We have wind energy coming into our region, all based in manufacturing. This is a manufacturing project. We happen to have an empty building in New London that used to be a newspaper building that used water. Perfect. Hallelujah. And we have a very cool arts culture in New London. We have wonderful colleges and world-class theater and museums and young people that are doing all sorts of cool making in our maker spaces. Great immigration heritage in our region, primarily due to our two Native American casinos that brought in a lot of immigrants. We have great food and great diversity. And this fits, right? This fits into that ecosystem. So for me, plus we have a sister project in Stanford, and wouldn't it be cool to link projects across the state? So to me, yes, it makes sense. And part of the challenge is to put it into the language that people like me, that perhaps have some control over assets or whatever it may be, understand how this fits into the whole ecosystem. I think this is an incredible opportunity. I'm very excited about it. We have a great farming and agricultural history. We're losing a lot of our farms to apartments and condos and things like that because we have a burgeoning workforce and we need more places for them to live. But we also need cool places for them to live. And I think this fits right in with making our region more diverse in terms of the type of manufacturing we do, more artistically gifted in terms of using these textiles in really beautiful ways. And it just, when you put it into the right language, it fits. So I no longer think you're wackadoo. So yeah, so I might be in a minority. But yeah, I think you said it right in terms of sourcing. Is people that are coming into our communities are young. New London is a very young city. They want to know where things come from, and they're willing to pay a little bit more for where things come from. I know my son is 16. He's all about conservation and sustainability and knowing where things come from. He's on a tear right now to ban commercial fishing, so, it's exactly. Well, he'd love to, but it is, and it doesn't have to be something that's out there. I think we just need to bring it into a language that people understand, that it fits and it makes sense, and it makes sense now, so we don't lose this opportunity. Yeah.
So what I think is I think your statement that it has to be in language that you can understand, and what we have to recover is this idea we focus on a fiber, or we focus on a thing, and we have to understand that it's part of a system, and how do we participate in this system, and when we're looking at the system, then one of our challenges is going to be a business norm, which is on economies of scale, which is forcing this terrific overproduction, which is literally killing us. Okay, and so one of the things that we are looking at in terms of putting vital manufacturing infrastructure back into our community so that we have the capacity to make. One of the things I think about is that this is really a new world, okay? This is, I mean, it's a return, okay? It's a recovery of a kind of culture and an economy and a way of being. But when I look at the last big, kind of like the way our world changed, and I look at the emergence of e-commerce, okay? And you look at Jeff Bezos and Amazon, and all those years when everyone was snickering, saying, oh, he's losing all that money on books. I mean, they must be wackadoo, right? They're totally wackadoo. And what you realize was going on actually is that they were building the infrastructure for e-commerce, okay? And now it's like extraordinarily profitable and valuable. I look at where we are, and we have to build the infrastructure to decarbonize the economy. And that's going to take levels of investment. And so you're going to need the same kind of future, forward-looking investors and perhaps venture capitalists, perhaps. But I also look at the initiatives that are already being made in terms of our petroleum industries, big oil, that is spending X amount of money on decarbonization technologies. And then the Department of Energy is spending $100 million on decarbonization technology. And yet I hear that farmers and ranchers and taking care of the earth is actually keeping carbon in balance. So when we're looking at building these new economies, I wonder, how do we best invite these traditional investments that are going to I think it's quite dubious, these decarbonization technologies, which have huge carbon footprints to build, huge carbon footprints to run, and then they're sucking the carbon out of the air. I mean, it's just that they just put in there, okay? And so, I mean, talk about a methane balance, right? So when I'm thinking about what we need to really accomplish what we're doing, we need investment in farmers and ranchers. I know that's a Northeast term to say farmer. And I think this conversation isn't vivid enough about how our farms produce the fibers, produce the fibers that are so much more ecological. Okay, when you have wool, you wash it less. So much of what happens with fashion's impact is post-purchase. How many times do you wash it? And we've got these new technologies, these formats like, the library model of Rent the Runway. And people think, oh, well, that's really good because it's cutting down manufacturing-related emissions because you're just borrowing it. But when you look at the transportation impact of that, easy to click, easy to return, right? I mean, we know that from just the Amazon model of buying. But also, if I get this wonderful wool suit that William is wearing tonight, okay, which he has gotten at Rent the Runway and returns, they have to dry clean it. Never, right? They have to dry clean it before they send it to me. And then Abby's going to wear it next week at that party. That's going to look great, okay? So then they have to dry clean it for Abby, okay? And now, Emily, you're going to wear it. And then Andra's going to wear it, okay? Karen, you're going to wear it. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, how many dry cleanings is that, right? And then Trent wants to wear it, okay? So, these models that I think they point to where we need to go, they point to a problem, but we don't stop there. That's not a solution. I mean, look carefully at that. I mean, there's been a big study now, Union of Concerned Scientists have just produced a research on Uber. Everyone thought, oh, no one's going to buy a car. You're just going to do ride hailing. And it's actually causing 70% more emissions, okay, because they just drive all over the place. So I wonder if anyone on this panel has thoughts. I think there should be a farm aid. I think we have, it should be a green farm aid toward more carbon sequestration, more farmers. We have so much public land in Connecticut that basically has to be mowed. We talked about this, Karen. Okay, let's contract graze that and get young farmers on those lands. Any thoughts on this, esteemed panel?
Sure. You want?
No, go for it. You
go?
start.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, we should definitely be using the lands that we have for their best use and getting ruminants on them instead of expending more carbon to mow them and basically lose all of that, forage that you would be otherwise feeding to the animals, and you're sort of throwing something away that's very valuable. So, and additionally, having more support, I think, all the farmers I've talked to, more support from the state and from the towns is definitely one of the things that they've called out as like something that's missing. It's there's a lot of focus on vegetable crops and not very much focus on people that keep animals. So having that extra support from the state and the towns.
And federal government.
Yes, well,
yes, if
of
it's
course.
Department of Energy.
So I think I'm just going to go back to what it takes sometimes is creating that bridge. Why does it matter? We know in this room why it matters. But the town or the state needs to understand why that makes financial sense for them to do that. So sometimes you have to tell a story. I mean, I used to be in healthcare, and I wanted to build a health center. We worked for poor people who had no insurance or very limited insurance. And of course you want to build a health center for that. I could not get anyone to fund it until I translated it into the number of jobs that was going to be created. Then I had the funding in 6 weeks. So sometimes you just have to tell the story in the way, and you hate to have to do that. It doesn't feel good to have to do that sometimes, but sometimes you have to tell the story in a way that is compelling to the audience you're speaking to. So
Let's just do the cost of, the cost of climate change in 10 years, okay? And just bring that forward. That money will have to be spent and have happened. And I think that's what the finance community is already doing when they're putting out those numbers, okay? So let's know those numbers are going to be spent and spend them now, and therefore avert that and build prosperity. I feel very, very passionate about an appropriate level of investment coming to our frontline environment, people who are the farmers.
So this isn't a difficult recipe. It's very easy. Put more profitability in what the farmer produces, and he will produce in excess. It will never happen coming from a top mandate down. You'll have government interference. You'll have a discussion on how it needs to be done. You'll have somebody in another country in Brazil that thinks they can do it better. They'll have more money than we have. You put profitability in the products that are produced, and the American farmer will do better than anybody else in the world. It's that simple.
Okay, question. Is it really put profitability in that, or do we encumber the offshore with a carbon tax that actually makes that more expensive so that we are cost competitive now? How do you put profitability in there? I mean, you put profitability in there by lowering our overhead, which can be accomplished if we get an appropriate level of investment in farmers.
Or you put profitability.
Let me just wait in on that, and then I'll give it to you. So, yeah, because anytime we put a tax trying to protect somebody, it comes back to bite the people that we try to protect. And so the only way to accomplish this is just simply create the grassroots demand for the products that we're producing. You know, and today, let's face the reality. We have the supercenters. Walmart controls 30% of the food sales, retail sales, and the majority of the people go there because it's cheaper than they can get it somewhere else. So the answer is increase profitability by increasing the demand of people who are willing to pay for the products that are produced in Connecticut, in Nebraska, Texas, wherever the case may be.
Yeah, he said exactly what I was going to say, that you increase sales, you increase profitability.
Boy, I'm glad I beat you.
So one of the terrific things about being part of the Union of Concerned Researchers in Fashion is that we have people all over the world who we are now in touch with who can send us information. And there was a terrific study done in Norway that was completed in September 2019. And one of the board members of the UCRF sent it to me. And to your point, Trent and William, about building that consumer demand for these products, and I bring this to you, Nancy, is in Norway they talked about how there's certain seals of approval for foods. Okay, so you'll go and want that food because you'll know it's from a particular area. Can we, what would you think about building a label, okay, around very local wools, so that there is an understanding of that value, and wools and meats. Okay, this is an important double income we have to have.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, we're all about labels, right? You know, we love to know.
Yeah.
You know, we love to wear labels and show labels. I think that's a great idea, and I think showing then, you know, going back to the value proposition, is showing that by virtue of buying these things locally, supporting the locally, this is unfortunately the bad word, the tax revenue that increases, and this is why it makes sense. You know, this is why it makes sense. But I think, like we do with the farm to table restaurants or whatever it may be, we have the farm to scour to studio textiles, and you know, made in New London or made in Connecticut or made, you know, whatever it may be, and we can trace that from start to finish. I think that's a great idea. I just wonder if it's going to be big enough to impact the change that you want to make. You know, I think this is a much bigger change than just, you know, what we're trying to do here. And so I would look at the experts here in terms of the impact of something like this and what it would mean.
Well, of course it has to be big enough to have that impact, but you have to start. And you know, when you build any sort of business that's selling consumer products that have come from farm-raised products, you know, the first season you're not profitable. The second, or third, or fourth, maybe not. But what's interesting is once you start to build word of mouth, and also to talk to that labeling, you're not saying, oh, this is going to make you taller and younger, and you're actually giving fact that you're using as marketing, not fantasy, which makes it really compelling, especially to the younger generation, because they're all about authenticity. And I think what happens is you do that pocket in Connecticut, and then other areas start to pick up as well, and then they connect. And so you have to start.
We have a very mobile population now, so every 5 years you're changing jobs and changing communities, so I think it grows.
Well, I think that's one of the things that the Connecticut Fiber Shed chapter is starting to do with some of our farmers, is they're starting to label their finished products, their yarns and scarves and various things as Connecticut Fiber Shed. And so that's one
of the Connecticut Blanket Project.
And then, yeah, we have that amazing Connecticut Blanket Project. That's not part of our group, but the Connecticut Sheep Breeders Association does a really good job with that. They, I think it's almost all New England. I think one of the processes has to go, I believe it's the scouring, has to go out of state, or out of the region of the Northeast. But, you know, I think empowering some of the existing labeling structures would also be good. The Connecticut Grown program is pretty strong in the agriculture sector for promoting Connecticut grown, you know, vegetable products. So sort of bolstering that. And I was speaking to a fiber farmer yesterday, and she was sort of remarking that she wished that there was like a Woolmark for America. And
Woolmark is the Australian wool advocacy. organization.
Yeah, and I know that ASI started one last year, I think, called American Wool.
Well, they contacted us.
So
Right.
they're fairly new, but giving strength to those existing labels may also help as well.
I think there's also a real misunderstanding about what cost is. You know, when you say, I mean, to the Walmart model, you know, oh, well, I can get this T-shirt for $1. Well, this T-shirt actually has a cost, and when you produce it in that way that's so cheap, it is happening offshore, where there aren't environmental protections, where the labor isn't paid a fair wage. And so it's very important for us as consumers to understand that maybe a garment that seems to be very cheap has the same price as what we would have here. Someone else is paying that cost. So someone else's landscape, someone else's river, someone else's sister or mother or brother. And it's really our purchasing power that will drive it. That's one of the things that's happened in fashion, is that the brands have really co-opted who's in charge of this sustainability issue. And just step back and think about that. What is it really reasonable that an organization that's making profit from a current model is going to significantly reinvent it? It's not likely, okay? And so again, it's about informing the consumer of, this isn't a cheap T-shirt. This is a T-shirt of a basic cost, and who's paying that if you aren't?
And a lot. Do you want to follow up on that, Wayne? And this is the same discussion that we're having today in the food business. Okay, so I'm wearing a 100% wool Schaefer, made in the USA. Most all of my vests are Schaefer, including the buttons, and that's their pride. Wow. Their pride is that they're 100% American made. You already told us that only 3% of the U.S. clothing is American made, and yet every piece of clothing 327 million Americans buy every day tells you what country it was made in. So just labeling it isn't working. The reason it isn't working is what you've already spoke of, and I just want to enunciate, and that is that the current retail monopoly generates a profit by selling a T-shirt very cheap. And so the answer continues to be find a way to educate and assist smaller opportunities, fiber farmer, which is a word I never used until that moment, and create that revenue and assist. And, you know, the best thing about marketing is getting loud. Yeah. We always think it just takes a lot of money. It just takes getting loud. Right. The minorities always win, whether it's in Congress or at the marketplace, because they're the loudest. So if this is something that we believe in, we just really champion that farmer and talk about the whole system. And what I want to really enunciate is what you mentioned earlier, Jane, is that the farmer is part of the system. Everything that we do is a continual cycle. And if we don't have the right soil health, we pay the price. It's not Mother Earth, it's we pay the price.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the fact that it is amazing to me where someone will go into a store and say, "Oh, no, I will not buy from child labor or dirty labor or any of that list, but I want my leggings to cost $5." They don't cost $5.
They don't cost $5, right?
You know, unless you've cheated somewhere else. There's no such thing. So, some of our work will be upending that methodology or that belief system.
It's really, I mean, again, to go back to the farmer is not saying, I'm going to get this sheep. The farmer is saying, what are the weather conditions? What is the food that's needed? Where does the grazing happen? The farmer, it's not a thing. It's part of a living system. And somehow as consumers, we've been co-opted into thinking that not participating in living systems is somehow joyful. And to your point about, or Nancy, I think it was about place, and I'm Gucci, I'm Dior, I'm these names. Jennifer had made me a sample of all the different diverse breeds we have in Connecticut, and we took it to a young designer who we're very interested in, who works with wool and knitting, and he picked up these fibers that you had made for us, and he said, each one of these is a place. And I thought that was such a profound understanding that, to the point, it's not just made in America, It's made by people in dialogue with the land that sustains us. And how we need to reconnect that.
Just to be clear, William, that farmers use child labor too. One of my 3 is sitting right there, which is why she lives in Maryland.
Hard to get off the farm.
I think part of, unfortunately, part of the way we do that, though, is through shame, right? So everyone's ashamed to use water bottles, single-use water bottles now because that's horrible for the environment. For a time it was Hershey's. Don't eat Hershey's because it's child labor. So sometimes, unfortunately, you have to use that avenue. It's not enough sometimes to say, this piece costs more because it was made by adults in America versus child labor somewhere else. The fact is, it's 1/10 of the price, so that's what I'm going to pay. So you've got to create more of a reason not to be seen in that cheap T-shirt, unfortunately.
Yeah, I also think that one of the things that is challenging for us as a community is the fast fashion corporate entities who say, okay, our mature markets aren't going to participate in this anymore, so we're going to go to the developing countries, okay? It's like, it is a world ecology. It is a world ecology in that, there have been NASA photos recently about the air quality over China, if you've seen it, like what the air quality looked like in November, and now with the manufacturing shutdown. And it's like, oh, well, look at this. And there's an economic historian I admire very much. He's at Columbia, and he was saying, well, basically, China now has emissions that are greater than the U.S. and Europe combined. Okay, so to some extent, we are now bystanders on this. What's going to happen? The players are going to be India and China. And I sent him an email with a question, which he hasn't responded to. You can answer now. And I said, but how can we be bystanders in this if the emissions are driven by manufacturing that comes from our demand? Right? Okay. And again, I think, they talk about the slow food movement and the slow clothing movement, and I don't like anything very slow, so I don't necessarily like that. But I like the idea of it, have a full thought. Have a full thought. If it's so cheap, why is it so cheap? For instance, we hear a lot about Caring Group and about the environmental P&Ls, profit and losses going on, and they're saying, well, our extended supply chains are really, really difficult to track, and so it's hard for us to measure. I was like, wow, yeah, that's going to be really challenging. And then I'm like, anonymity in the 21st century is really expensive. Right? If you don't know what's happening at the end of those supply chains, baby, you are not asking. Okay? And so it's that level of accountability for our consumers that will drive the market. The brands are not going to drive the market. Okay? And that's to your point of how we put the value back in the farm, which is what sustains us. I'd like to open it to questions, but I had actually intended to start this in a different way. So instead, I would like to finish our part of this like this. I would like each of you to tell me what you're wearing and why you're wearing it. I mean, I know we can see it. And so, of course, Trent already did that. Yeah. Okay, so we're just catching up. But that's how I wanted to start.
I'm a big believer in 2 birds with 1 stone. So I am wearing a cashmere wool blazer that was handmade, no glue or anything like that inside of it, that I did in Italy when I was there. And it's also lined in a down fabric, so I can wear it as a coat. So it's 2 things in one.
That's really cool. Hi, I'm Jennifer. I'm wearing a hand knit sweater. This was my first adult human-sized knitting sweater that I made myself. It has buttons from this really cool lady in, I believe it's Vermont. She does these wooden buttons from fallen limbs and a seed necklace. But the rest, unfortunately, is regular because I'm got the maternity going on. So
we'll supply that soon.
The most beautiful thing in the world is a pregnant woman. They glow like nothing else. My hat was made by a gentleman in Denver for me. My boots are made in Texas, thanks to Andrew for turning me on. And my Wrangler jeans, I'm pretty sure were made by a family in Mexico that appreciate my $3.42. My underwear are not hemp. My belt came
All
from
right.
Kentucky.
You're very thorough. You're very thorough, Trent.
And being the boring person in the room,
You're not
I
at all
am
answered.
not wearing a single thing that I'm proud of.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and
Well,
that
you
says a
look-
lot. But it says a lot. You know, one of the things that we haven't talked about that might be of interest is 3% of the clothes are made here, but aren't 100% of the clothes disposed of here?
Oh, well done.
So isn't that, you know, just something to think about as we're talking about our
textile
story?
waste is
Yeah.
a huge conversation for us, focusing on the natural fibers and keeping things. You know, the study I mentioned from Oslo, they actually really focus on the fact that it's use function, okay, of the clothing. How do we extend these garments so that they have longer life and less stress on our systems? And it is a real problem for us with the extraordinary amount of synthetic textile, because we really don't know how these things break down. I mean, now we know about microplastics in the oceans when we wash things. You don't have that with wool, right? So I'm going to just speak about this charming little necklace that maybe any of you have noticed, which is made for me was made by a friend and a neighbor in Reading. She's now moved to Rhode Island, but her mother was a woman named Erica Wilson. And Erica Wilson, for those of you who may be in the needle craft field, really was a kind of early Martha Stewart in the sense of bringing handcrafts back to I guess social engagement, right? People would get around and do things like that. So this is a handmade Jolly Roger, and I feel that we are the pirates of the new way forward. So I thought I would wear it as an emblem. I'd love to open up to questions now.
Jane, I think Abby's got a lot to share. Her body language says, I want to contribute.
That's brilliant. I'm going to pass this then immediately to the left. Or welcome you over.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm a local farmer out in Bosra, Connecticut, which is about an hour the other direction. I raise sheep and alpacas, and I work on an alpaca farm that has its own fiber mill, where we process people's fleeces as well as our own. So we're turning raw fleece into a finished product, which would be yarn. So then a producer is able to sell it to the consumer to either knit or crochet, weave, whatever they will with it. So that's kind of what I do. I don't know what I'm supposed to contribute here. Trent, do you have any questions?
So I would just like to say that Abby is really important for us, because you must be all of 23 or 24?
21.
Okay, she's 21. And the average age of farmers in Connecticut is like 54, 56, right?
The average age of the United States farmer is 3 years older than the average person in St. Petersburg retirement community.
Wow.
True story.
Wow. So the next generation of farmers, it's just terrifically important to us. Karen, who is also Connecticut farmer, and we had an amazing conversation where I learned about Connecticut's 20 vocational agriculture schools, where you can opt out as a middle school student, go to a special high school. You can either train to be a vet or train to be working actually running the farm or on the farm, the full spectrum, right, from science to practice, which is, I think, a tremendous initiative from our state to building young generation. I'm an artist. I teach at Parsons. I teach young artists. And so many young people want to be working on the land. And how do we help that happen is important for us to think about, and not just think about, to do. Questions from anyone? Please, Connor.
Hi, my name's Connor. I'm just wondering if you all have any ideas on how we can support entrepreneurs in the farming and textile industries, just at the very early stages, potentially.
Well, I'm just going to repeat, Connor, what I said earlier. We have to get loud. So many times we hear about a good idea, and we'll sit in this meeting room and I'll just issue the challenge, because we're talking about a lot of cool things, all the way from Manhattan to the most rural county in the nation. And we have these ideas floating about. And what are each one of us going to do different tomorrow or in April or May that we did yesterday? Because if we all just sit around here and talk about these things and then go about in our routine and doing the same thing in the future, what did we accomplish? So my answer to you, it seems to be somewhat like throwing it off, but it is, what are you going to do different tomorrow? If this is what you believe in, what are each one of us going to do different tomorrow to accomplish that, Abby?
So something to maybe answer or provide, something to maybe provide a little bit of light to your question was, I know I had asked those questions because starting my own farm, I was like, all right, I'm still a college student trying to work part-time to support my start of a farm. Is there any way I can get grants or any type of aid? The answer that I got was I need to provide 3 years worth of tax information before I'm eligible to qualify for these grants. So I need to stay in business 3 years before I'm able to get any aid. So that's what I found, that unfortunately.
I'd like to speak to that. Sure. So I think your position, though, is from the private sector, and the money you were applying for was public sector money, right? It was small business grant, or right? Yes. So I think what we need to talk about is, how do we partner? How do we invest in what is going to be the future of an absolutely vital and transformative industry? I'm quite serious when I make the analogy between the e-commerce model and the level of investment, and I think you understand what I'm talking about. But it's going to be something different than the venture capital model, which is just, scale to and then exit and crash and burn. It's really about building long-term value, which is what the early investors in Amazon were doing. They understood long-term value. So I'd love to have that conversation with you. So let's do it.
Ab had a question.
Would you like a microphone?
And he's a lender, so I think he's going to give all the answers right here.
Well, I
it's
guess
over. We're done. The solution.
No, I would just say, tell us about your venture. Are you seeking capital right now?
I'm not really seeking capital. I've got this organization called Social Sector Network, and we support early stage social entrepreneurs working towards the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
If he doesn't speak into a microphone, the people watching are not going to be happy. Sorry, Jane.
Yeah, so I run an organization called Social Sector Network, LLC, and it's focused on supporting early stage social enterprises working towards the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And so I'd prefer to get funding for our partner organizations before my organization. And also speaking to your issue a little bit, I've got like an ebook with all these strategies on different funding mechanisms you can access if you want to check that out. So, yeah.
Great. First of all, thank you all for being here. It's been really informative. Two things. One, William, you've been on the big brand side, fashion house side. Why now? And how do you force change by them, the brands, to follow, or will they? Because my sense is, from hearing this and observation, is the capital's not going to flow to change, to your point, a profit-making enterprise and system. So why now is there momentum, and how do you take it from the large brand to what you're doing now?
Well, what I've been working on for the last 5 years is, in addition to designing, but I've been involved in an industrial project where we took a natural fiber down and converted it into a fabric in a clean, technologically advanced way. First ever, and it's quite disruptive, and it's won quite a few awards because of how disruptive it is and how it changes. And so part of it is to take that experience to New London, to the Scourer, and I'll circle back to that. But more importantly, the world has changed. It's not, oh, let me dress exactly the way Gucci tells me to dress anymore. And I think that it has also changed from where these brands, as I said, the brands are dictating. No, now it's peer-to-peer. It's Instagram. It's social. Everyone's learning from each other. So, and there's this collective consciousness of, no, I want authentic. I want better. I want sustainable. I want proper. I want to have a world to have kids in. And so that's sort of the macro, and the micro is I met Jane.
Yeah. One follow up is, I mean, let's take the Walmart example. I mean, it still needs to be it needs to be available that the average person you can feel that way. So I guess, Trent, how do you make it profitable for the farmers, and how do you increase the number of how do you reverse, the trend from 1930 to now for just more people to raise the sheep? Or
So the easy answer to that, Ab, is not the real answer. The easy answer is that you become part of a niche, and then the niche adds more value, and you're part of a system that captures that value. For example, there's a butcher shop in this town that we went in this morning where milk is $8 a gallon, $16 a gallon, $8 for a half a gallon. Eggs are $6.50 a dozen. Dry-aged T-bones are $28.50 a pound. And all of that is, as a farmer, you're looking at like, this is what we got to raise. The sheer reality is that roughly 4% of the United States population will pay those prices. So we have to be a part of a system that adds value, but then also be closer to that end user so that we capture more. So in 1950, the farmer's share of the consumer's food dollar spent was roughly 60%. In 2019, it was 14%. And I would bet the parallels are exactly with fiber. So the answer to me long term is, how do we get closer to that consumer's dollar? I don't believe long term there's going to be a significant number of people willing to pay more for those products. Is how do we, as the farmer, get more of what the consumer's spending? That's pretty easy. So, I mean, that's an easy solution, but how do you do that? And it comes back to kind of the overall theme here, which is who's controlling at the retail level, and who are we going to cut out?
So I'd like to speak to that, because the change is already happening, and it is happening fast, and it's this generation here that is driving the change. And we know that 40% of consumers now are Gen Z. Gen Z are very concerned about ethical manufacturing, very concerned about ecological. I think Trent is spot on. We talk about this in our work about how did we meet? We did a label with you. Why did we do that? To connect with the community and raise visibility. Get loud, engage people. And this is what I think is the real strength of the UN Charter, which says, it's not saying if you're a signatory on this, go and talk to the brands. It's saying you must use your platform to speak to the consumer. Because at the end of the day, the brands want us to know, oh, well, we've got the capital and we're doing this. But baby, if there's no market for it, okay, horse and buggy model, right? I mean, I think that change is happening really fast. And in retail itself, we know that 10 out of the 16 major bankruptcies of 2019 were in retail, were apparel. Okay, people don't want it. Okay, they don't want this stuff. Hence, H&M's $4 billion backlog of unsold inventory, right? And so I think where we are is people need the actual better options, and they need to know that what real cost is. So if you are eating this cheap hamburger, okay, that has been raised in a way that is cruel to the animal, has ecological impacts which are dreadful, and you actually understand what that cost is, the consumer will make a better choice. Now, in fashion, what happens is, people will say to me, well, this is just for the very wealthy. And it's like, why do you think it is okay for you to wear a shirt that costs less than your cup of coffee? Okay, which is an Aisha who's the founder of this foundation, Remake, where Eamon is also is a designer with. And we have compartmentalized value and mistaken it and revere it as profit, okay? But these profits are impoverishing us, and this generation is actually looking to buy value. So I think that change is happening, and I think it's happening fast.
Jane, so don't you think also that some of that value comes from the story and the connection?
Oh, totally.
Because I feel that the connection with the farmers and the connection with these people that you're then interacting with long term, I think adds a lot to the final garment. I mean, like if you are buying from the same farm, you know, the $5 or however much milk, like I go to the same farm every week and buy $5 milk in glass bottles like they used to get for my son. And we have a really great relationship with that farmer now. And we see him multiple times a week. And I think that, you know, we're sort of reaching like the stuff capacity. Like people are scaling back and people want sort of meaningful things to do with their money. And I think that this is definitely one of those avenues.
I think that that's what, you know, someone said to me, you know, well, I don't see it, Jane. And I said, well, it's an opportunity. And if everyone saw it, it wouldn't be an opportunity.
And as far as regular consumer, when someone's spending, you know, oh, I'm only buying this shirt because it's, you know, $18 at H&M, but you're buying one every week, right. It's the same amount of money. It's just amortized differently.
I want to speak to two things. Number one, that hamburger doesn't exist in the United States where people are cruel to the animal. That's a true story, and I'd be glad to document that anywhere.
I'm sorry.
You mentioned that you don't want to buy a hamburger if the people have been cruel to the animal and it's maybe not fit to eat. That doesn't happen in the United States. We have the best system in the world. People take care of their critters, despite what you read on the internet. But I want to just expand upon my point of being loud, and you might think it's not related to you in any way, shape, or form, but Connecticut does have a raw milk law. Okay, so pasteurization of milk was one of the 4 pillars of public health at a time when we did not have refrigeration like we did. And I don't believe that we should be able to just go to the grocery store and buy raw milk. But by the state government telling you as a consumer, I can't enter a contract with Jen and buy her milk from her, affects every one of us in this room that want to also sell our fibers to our neighbor. We have too much of the state government imposing their values on us as individual citizens. I understand them thinking they're wanting to protect us, but they should not be intruding upon me doing business with my neighbor. And I assure you, nobody was there in this room when Connecticut passed that law. But my point is that it's all incrementalism.
Yes.
And every law that's passed, it makes it tougher for somebody to do business on their own property with somebody else who wants to do business on their property. It affects all of us.
And it's not only that it affects, it's also laggard. Okay, so the science, I mean, we're talking about soil science now. I mean, we know that we can rebuild soil vitality, but when you've got, I know from brownfields, industrially impacted landscapes, you know, we're supposed to encapsulate them. We're supposed to do these things that we can't heal, and those are regulatory frameworks. And that, you know, you are literally having to participate in systems that you know are doing harm. And we know them because of current science, and the regulatory frameworks are entrenched, they're incumbent, and they are hard to move. And that is really difficult for us.
And a lot of them are unknown until you're dealing with them. We had a client, a cheesemaker, and he cannot buy a partial truck of milk in Connecticut. You have to buy the whole. What? Yeah. So he's got to buy it out of state. So it's just silly stuff like that I think because the laws were made so long ago that people just aren't aware of. And I think sometimes you just have to do a reality, you know, be loud. This is the nonsense that we spend money regulating instead of giving it to farmers or doing whatever it may be.
Questions?
I heard today, I didn't verify this, but I heard today that it's illegal for a farmer to, what was the number of sheep? To own a number, I'm not looking at you, Abby. It was a single farmer, a single man, legally cannot own sheep in the state of Connecticut.
What? I think it
I think you'd be
depends on the
shocked at the
town.
old laws that still reside on the books. I'm sharing something that I wouldn't share in public till I look it up. But there are old laws like that that are completely irrelevant.
Check
Yeah.
it out, please.
Let's look that one up. But to the point, you know, they're created to benefit those that are old, or the bigger companies. The purpose of a regulation should not be to limit business. It is to keep business regular. And what's happening is it creates barriers that small entities cannot compete with. Look at people Googling.
I know that different towns have different regulations, and that is one of the things that is challenging for people that want to keep animals. I have a friend that was looking at a property in Avon, and it's just shy of 4 acres, and she would not be allowed to have more than 3 sheep on 4 acres, almost 4 acres, because of their specific rules about livestock. And you can certainly keep more than 3 or 4 sheep on that amount of acreage, and historically that's what that land was used for. So the towns have, and I think that they're trying to keep a certain characteristic to their town, but they forget that that characteristic of that land was not because of lawnmowers. That beautiful bucolic scene was because it was being grazed with animals. It might smell, and there might be noises.
I think when Eamon began with his opening remarks and he talked about imagination, okay, I think part of where we would like to maybe wrap this is to understand that these compartments that we have become accustomed to putting our values in and living within, I would like to see, for instance, the Department of Energy spend some fraction of the $100 million on decarbonization technology, on understanding that a farm is a decarbonizing technology, okay? And those tax dollars, particularly coming out of the DOE, are our monies. And how can we help build the kinds of environment and landscape and communities? And to Jen's point about building a relationship with the farmer, I mean, we want to have engaged, caring, empathetic communities. Get to know your producer, help your producer. And, to Trent's point about sustainability being co-opted, I mean, there is so much awareness that this is what people are craving for, that you have Macy's doing, community-oriented experiential retail called Story, okay? Because everyone thinks stories are important, right? And it's failed because it's not, okay? It just isn't that. And I think that we cannot underestimate how powerful we are. And when we shop for value and we encourage our friends and our families to do this, it can scale really quickly. And for our perspective, when you're saying, what are we going to do differently about this? I'm going to call you and we're going to talk about business models and investment, okay? But we are absolutely dedicated to making the good options, so when you want a jumper, a sweater, okay, that meets these values, we have one for you. And we talk about, how do we price this to make it available to all range of different people. And I think that is going to require a level of investment. But if that investment is building healthy communities and decarbonizing the environment, give me some of that DOE money, okay, for us. I mean, not just us.
When Jane, don't you think also taking into account what he had said about the cost per wear?
Right, of course.
Taking that into account really makes a difference, and especially when you don't have to wash it very much. Like, I think I've washed this one time since I made it, like last season.
Wool
you
is
just don't
antimicrobial.
have to wash it very much. It takes very little soap. It doesn't take much water. You don't have to throw it in the wash every time you wear it. And, also the difference you could make to a small farmer by buying a sweater's amount of wool is huge for them. So, you could really lift a lot of farmers up very quickly.
And I think it is also, we identify in this category. It's about the producers developing the relationship with the farmers. Okay, so these are the garments, and then being noisy about it, making it the conversation we want to have, and being available. Oh, please. Yeah.
Just something that I also think would be very beneficial to the topic here is just the amount of education that people have, basically a lack thereof, is emphasizing these fantastic properties of the wools. Jen, you only had to wash your sweater like once since you made it. Many people consumers don't understand or know these facts. So I think educating the public as well as a reinforcing factor would greatly help our cause here as well.
Yeah, and so one of the labels we've done, and which is how we met Ab, is called Climate Couture, and it's co-production. And so we have 3 different price points in this co-production. But a colleague of ours is the president of the Norwalk River Watershed Association, and she's been a leading player in the pollinator path to help support the bees. And she said to me, I have spoken to communities from Yonkers up to Newburgh, okay? And she said, what I really understand is that Americans don't want to be taught. People don't want to be taught, okay? But they do want to know what to do. And she said, here's the stuff and go do it. Okay, it is really about creating, I think, the social context. And one of the reasons we're so excited about New London and our experience in Stamford is that when you're doing this in the community, it becomes a social engagement. And so I think, Trent, I know you've been doing your radio show for 17 years. It's about bridging the rural and urban divide. And this is really about building our communities, connecting with our producers, so the consumer is part of the process. And it's the process that we have to be supporting. It's not any one given output.
Working away from siloed systems to a
because
ecosystem.
They aren't. It's an illusion that they are, okay? I mean, your cheap sweater is destroying that river in Thailand. It's a cost. You're just not allowed to know it. But when you know it, you don't want it.
I heard you think about how we'd make our individual wrap up. First of all, Jen, if dudes doing laundry knew they could only wash their sweater once a year, you sold half of them already.
It'll be the one wash sweater dude.
Secondly, and more importantly, the United States military once again has wool back in their uniforms because it is the absolute best way to protect those individuals risking their lives to protect our freedom. And they protect our freedom under the guise of the United States Constitution, and the most important part of that Constitution is the Bill of Rights. And number 1 on that Bill of Rights is the freedom to speak, the right to assemble, and the right to be heard. So because wool protects our military men and women, it protects our right to be heard. We live in a representative republic. So many times that get hijacked. We do not live in a democracy. We live in a representative republic. And if we just simply get louder, and what was your word at the beginning, which I think would be a distraction? Disruptor.
Which can be distracting.
Will be heard. Yeah. And I think it's that simple. And thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this.
Oh gosh, I don't want to go next here.
Thanks. I can't top that. I think you made a great point about the sweater because, unfortunately, you can tell somebody that you're destroying a river in Thailand, and the person will say this, but they'll still buy the $3. Yeah. But they don't want to do their laundry every day. So I think creating that value proposition.
So disturbing.
I don't want to do my son's laundry every day. But creating that value proposition that gets the point across, but still gets the result that you're looking for in the words that people want. So I don't need to do laundry every day. This sweater is going to last 10 years, not one season.
15 lattes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Just like, the cost of ownership of a car. What's the cost of ownership of this garment? Mm-hmm. I think these were great points, and I'm very, very honored to be with all of you.
I was just going to say that the same way that, there's, you have that friend that, wears only navy blue and they're conservative, or their friend that wears pink and they're, wild, or et cetera, et cetera. And there are these tribes of people wearing different kinds of fashion. I look forward to a day where the tribe is supporting the local economy. That was my point.
Well, and wouldn't we all look so much different and so much more original if we were wearing things from our local bioregions? It would be really amazing to have those connections with our fiber farmers, and also have our own sort of fashion experience where we are creating our own
Yeah, I want to
collectively in this area.
So I want to speak to that. I did. There's actually a local young woman named Emily Weiss, who you may know her because she's the CEO of Glossier, so one of the unicorns of the cosmetics world. And she talked about the fact that it used to be in cosmetic that you wanted to teach your student relationship. So you went to the shop, and you went to the department store, and the cosmetics person would tell you what to do, right? And then you had the breakthrough of the Sephora model, where you had aggregated all these different brands. And now we're at this period where it's peer-to-peer with the influencers, right? And I think what we're seeing and what we can feel is, people are going to look at it and it's like, oh, you're wearing, that generic brand. Okay, it doesn't mean anything. And if anything, it probably means bad things. It means, you're going to read it and it's going to look like carbon emissions, and it's going to look like a dirty river, and it's going to look like microplastics. Okay, and you're going to be able to read that. And I think that is going to be a really beautiful way to be in the world. Anything else? My fine people, you've been so terrific. I feel very energized. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Yay.